Hi all, welcome to Digital Drawing. I'm just going to go over a few things in Photoshop to help you with your collage. So the assignments over here under week 1, D1 Personal Architectural History Collage. If you click on the PDF, it'll tell you more about the assignment. So just a few things we're going to go over. We're creating a 24 by 24 inch collage. It needs to document your personal architectural history. And we're experimenting with layers, layer masks, opacity, and blending modes. So I've heard from your previous teachers that most of you are already very comfortable in Photoshop. So I'm just going to quickly go over a few tools that might help you with this. So to start out with, you will go to Photoshop, File, New. You're going to create a custom size. It's going to be 24 inches by 24 inches, 300 pixels per inch. In your preset details here, I would put a title in right away. I want you to be very intentional with the naming convention. So if you go back to Canvas and back to the syllabus, which is here, you'll notice that if you scroll down, attendance, so under file management, it has this naming convention that I would like you to use. So you can copy that and put that in. So it is last name, first name. So for me, say Katie, ARC 211, and then the assignment is D1. The reason I'm being crazy about that is because when you are doing your portfolio at the end of the semester, it can be very difficult to find a file that you've named trial 1, 2, 3, 4, final. So you want to be very careful with how you're naming things and where you are saving them. Always save in at least 2 places. So if it's on your computer, make sure it's also in the cloud somewhere. Once this is all set, hit create. All right, so here is our piece of paper. To start out with, we're just going to place a few files on here. So if I go to File, Place Embedded. Embedded means that they'll be part of this. If they're linked, then they should update as you update another image. But for what I'm doing, is just going to be Place Embedded. And then I'm going to navigate to my folder. So I think I saved them in here. And I'm going to bring in these 3 first. So I'm just going to highlight them. I can hold down Shift to highlight all 3. Can't I? Oh, no, I can't. That's so annoying. Okay, so we're not going to place things one at a time. So hit cancel. You can drag in multiples at once. So I'm going to highlight these 3 and drag them in. You'll notice it comes right in the center. That's fine for what we're doing. I'm just going to hit enter. That'll place the first one. Enter will place the second one. Enter will place the third one. So rather than me trying to figure out how these connect to each other, I'm going to have the computer do that. So I'm going to come over here, and right now they're all smart objects, which means that they're linked to the photo, to a different file somewhere. I'm going to highlight them and rasterize them. That means that I'm turning them into little dots. So I'm making them just kind of like dumb dots, which is all we want for what we're doing. So now that I have these all highlighted, so I can hold down Shift on the Layers panel to highlight all those layers, I'm going to go to Edit and to Auto Align Layers. And you can just do auto and see what it comes up with. It might be super wacky, but I'm kind of interested in what the computer will do, so I'm just going to hit OK. And what the computer is going to try to do is create one image from these images that I've given it. Because I didn't necessarily take these all from the same perspective, the computer might have trouble finding places that things really align. Right, so it did this kind of wacky thing where it's distorting the photos to try to make this one coherent image, but obviously there's places that this just doesn't work. But I actually think that's interesting, so I'm going to leave that alone. Okay, so I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. So if I do Control T, that'll be transform. And as long as you drag it without hitting anything, it'll keep it in proportion. Let's say I wanted to change the proportion. If I hold shift, that'll allow me to stretch things around. But for now, let's just leave it a little bit smaller so I have some space to work with. Okay, so that's allowing the computer to arrange my photos for me. I'm going to do a file save. And I'm going to do right here. This one's perfect. Save. I'm going to replace that file. Okay. Okay, I'm going to bring in a few more images that I want to place by hand rather than having the computer place them. The first thing I'm thinking of doing is transferring this kind of perspective view more to a plan view. So I took one photo that's more of a plan view, so I'm going to drag that in. And I'm going to rotate this on the side. And I'm going to start making it smaller. So I'm having a little trouble seeing through this over to here to line it up. So I'm going to bring down the opacity. I could do that in the layers panel here. I'm just going to bring it down a little bit so it's a little bit easier to see where I am and what I'm doing. So I think I want that wall to maybe align there as like a point of reference, and then I'm going to bring this inward. So as long as I get that wall right here, maybe that line to that wall part to align. That I think that's pretty well. I'll bring that in and I'll make this smaller again. I don't want it to get too small though, so maybe like around here makes sense. Okay, and this is a judgment call, right? Like there's obviously no real place that these align, so I'm kind of making it up as I go. Okay, so I'm going to bring this opacity back up. I don't want to see so much of this floor in here. I want it to meld together a little bit better. So I want to delete some of this image. One way you could do that would just be erasing it. You could just select it, rasterize it, select it, delete it. But I prefer to work with masks because it allows me to edit it later if I decide that I want to bring pieces back. So I'm going to select the piece I want. So I want to keep the books. I want to keep the wall. I want to get rid of the floor. So I think I'm going to stop right around here. And just take out that part. So I'm going to highlight all the parts I want to keep, and then I'm going to hit this button, which is the mask button, and that'll automatically clip that out for me. Let's say I'm not happy with how this came out. I can always go back into the mask and add. So I can decide, okay, I want to cut this off sooner. I can select that whole area, make sure the mask part is selected, and go to edit, fill. If I fill it with black, that's the same thing as cutting it off. If I were to fill it with white, so if I go edit, fill it with white, that makes it 100% visible. If I want it to be like half visible, I could fill it with gray. So I would go to fill, 50% gray, hit OK, and that's going to put it at 50% opacity at that part. Okay, I'm going to bring in a few other images. So now this kind of flips the books to plan view. I want to bring them back to elevation. So I'm going to bring this over. I'm going to rotate it. I don't want all these books. I just want the upper shelf of them. So I'm going to take my polygonal lasso tool and make it so I'm just highlighting the upper shelf. This isn't the only way to select. There's lots of other ways too. You can use, if you hold down on here, lasso tool, magnetic lasso tool. If you would hold down here, you can use quick selection tool, object selection tool. Feel free to try all those out. So once I have that, I'm going to hit my mask button. Okay, and then I'm going to bring this over to here. I'm lining up that yellow book so that we have the change. You'll notice everything has kind of gotten crunched to one side of the canvas, and I don't really love that, so I want to move it all over at the same time. So I'm going to select all of my layers at once by holding down Shift, and then I can move this all over. And then if I click on this one, I think this should come down. I think it's too high for what I want to do. Okay. So I'm going to go back to here, Control T, and I want that to be smaller so that I can line up the yellow book and maybe this this book here. And like, it's not going to line up perfectly, but I am totally fine with that. Okay. Now that I have those in, the last thing I want to do is kind of work up in this area. And actually this wall is really bothering me. So I think I'm going to go back in and make that 50% opacity. So that was on this layer. Use my polygonal lasso tool. Get rid of that wall. Maybe I'll make it, yeah, I think I'm going to completely rid of it. So I'm going to edit, fill, black, and hit OK. Okay, I think that's a little bit less jarring to me. But now there's nothing really lining up here. So I want my books to at least line up. So I'm going to bring that over and line up that book. So it's kind of, so it looks like it's lining up to that shelf. Okay, these are aligned. This is not aligned. So I'm going to bring this one back up so it's aligned a little better. Okay, a couple more images I'm dragging in. I'm going to drag in this one of the chandelier to show the chandelier kind of getting bigger as it goes. So this is to try to highlight that kind of architectural detail of that chandelier. I don't necessarily want it to take over the way it's taking over, so I'm going to fade it away a little bit. So I'm going to use a different blending mode. If I go over to here, you can see there's all these different blending modes I can use that affect how this upper image interacts with the image below it. So I'm just going to pick one that I feel good about. I don't want it to, I was thinking maybe of like something like this so I can kind of see what's happening. Whoa, where'd that go? So this is just darken maybe, or I think darken's probably the one I want, or darker color. I'm going to go with darken. I'm going to bring down the opacity a little bit. So that's highlighting that without completely obliterating it. And I also don't really want this side window in there, so I'm just going to go ahead and mask that part out. Okay. So I have that going on. And then I wanted to bring in even a bigger picture of that chandelier. So I'm going to drag that in. And this one I think is going to be more of an overall pattern. So I want it to be super light and kind of disappear. So I'm going to go again back to my blending modes. And this one I might choose even something like that, an exclusion. So it's just changing the colors as it hits that. So you can still see the pattern when it's blank. When it's over something else, it really starts to interfere with the image. And I'm going to bring the opacity down again so it's a little bit more subtle. Okay, so I have those in. I didn't talk about any kind of soft selection, so let me bring in something that'll let me do that. So if I go back to these photos, I think I have one of this round guy, yeah, this one. I'm gonna drag this in. So let's say I wanted this to be bigger in my plan view. So you'll notice this is round, so using the polygonal lasso tool doesn't work all that well. So I can go ahead and use the magnetic lasso tool. And what's that going to do is it's going to try to find the edge of that the best that it can. And it kind of tries to stick to those edges. It's not always perfect, but the good news is that you can go back in and edit it. So if I keep going around, almost there. Sweet. So now that I have this selection, you'll notice that there's like some not great parts. So I'm going to go back in with my polygonal lasso tool, and I'm going to come over here to subtract from selection. And I can take out the little pieces that are not looking good. Same thing here. Take out that piece. I can also add into my selection. So here where I lost that little bit of it, I can add that in. I can take out over here. All right, not perfect. Let's pretend that's good enough. So I also want to kind of smooth this out so it's not so janky. So if I go to select, modify, I can expand my border a little bit. So I'm going to expand it 2 pixels and hit OK. So that's making this a little bit wider. Then I can also go to select and say modify, and I can smooth it. So I'm going to smooth it with a radius of 20 pixels. Hit OK. And so you see it's starting to smooth out some of those crazy bumps it made. And then if I go again to select, modify, I'm also going to feather it. And I'm going to feather it 5. And that's going to make the edge of this change in opacity so that it blends a little bit better into the things around it. So once I've done all that, I'm going to go ahead and hit the mask button. And it's not perfect. You can spend some more time and make it perfect, but it's a decent cutout of this shape. So this shape is that one. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. It's a little too big there. I kind of want it under that piece maybe. Let's see if I bring that down, if it looks a little better. I think it's a little bit much. I'm going to drag it down in layers to change the order. And I think maybe I'll rotate it. So Control T, you can rotate it by going to the corner. Okay, so now I have that happening. Great. One last thing I might want to bring in is I'd like something at a bit of a different scale. So everything here is kind of room scaled. I'd like to bring in an urban scale object. So I'm going to get a map of this location and bring it in. So if I can just go to Google Maps and get an image of the neighborhood. I don't love how rasterized that is. It's super rasterized, isn't it? It's usually a little bit better than that. If you don't want the labels on there, which I don't, you can go over here and turn labels off. And I guess that's just the best we're going to do in this area. I'm not sure why it's so rasterized. But I'm going to use my snip tool, new, and I can just grab this, copy it, bring this into Photoshop. I'm going to come down to the back because I know I want it towards the bottom anyway, and then do Control V. It should make its own layer. It's there. It's just under everything else. So if I hit move, the thing that you have to be a little bit careful of is the way Photoshop is now compared to how it used to be. It now selects whatever you click, which is pretty annoying when you just want to work with one layer that you can't see. So I think what I can do is I can lock everything else so that it doesn't automatically. So if I select all those, hit lock. Select that, hit lock. Now I should be able to grab it. There it is. Okay. Control T. It's going to be very rasterized because it's at such a low quality compared to everything else I got. I'm going to use it as a background texture so you won't notice it too much. I want the street grid to align with those books, so I'm going to rotate a little bit more. And I want it to reach the edge of the page there. Okay. So I don't like how that's colorful. I want to change that to black and white. So in order to do that, I'm going to come over to here. These are filters. These are they're adjustment layers. So I can do black and white as adjustment layer, and it'll be over here. And then you'll notice that went to black and white. I can edit what's darker, what's lighter, all of that, what tint it has. You'll notice if I drag this up above another layer, do you see how that layer just went black and white and that one just went black and white? You might not want that to happen. So if you want it to apply to just what's under it, if you hit Alt and then click it, it'll just apply to like directly what's after it. So let's do that for something else with a different adjustment layer. So let's say I want like this right here to get brighter. So that layer, what layer is that? If I click it, it should show up. And you can turn it on and off with this little eyeball so you can check if that's the right one. So let's say I want this to be brighter. So if I click on here, go to adjustment layer, I can do brightness contrast. If I just do this, notice everything under that brightness contrast layer is getting brighter. If I just wanted to apply to this guy, I'm going to hit Alt again onto there, and then I can just brighten up that object. I can also change the contrast on it. Okay, so now that I have all that, let's say for a final layer, I'm going to put in text. So I'm going to hit save so I don't lose everything. So for my final text layer, I'm going to just copy in the first paragraph of this. And then there's a text tool here. I can paste this in. And I don't love that font, but I'm also don't think I want to spend the time it would take me to find a font I loved. So we're going to go with this font. I want to make this stuff even bigger, so I'm going to do like 120. It's still not as big as I want it. So if I double click, I can get back in there. Oh, because I didn't actually change it. Let's try 150. Okay, that's closer to what I was thinking of. So I'm going to drag this over here. I want to bring this out wider to see if I can get the whole page in. Okay, so I don't want it to be black, I don't think. So I'm going to take this, make sure it's at the top, and then I'm going to play with my blending modes. So let's have about luminosity. Let's see, maybe one of these. So I'm not happy with just the blending modes changing it. So I think I'm going to change the color at first and then the blending mode. So if I go here, I can change the color up here. Let's give it like an orange. Hit OK. And then I'm going to go ahead and change the blending mode. So maybe hard light. And I want to bring down that opacity a little bit. Okay, so let's make sure I went over everything. I went over blending modes, I went over layers, I went over masks. I think that's everything I wanted to hit for this time. I really just want you guys to play around and create an image that then you can talk a little bit about your personal architectural history. What makes you interested in architecture? What kind of architecture you grew up in? What do you think of as architecture? What do you think of as banal? What do you think of as interesting? Whatever the story is you want to tell your classmates as a way of introduction. Let me know if you have questions. Thank you so much.